Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm gonna be ranking the discographies of female K-pop groups and soloists. I've made this video last year, but it was a tier list, and it only featured 10 groups, and since then I've only discovered way more groups and soloists, and my opinion has changed a lot since then. Instead of making a tier list, I thought I'd make a ranking, as I didn't feel like there were any bad discographies here for the most part. Before we begin, just know that there are no right or wrong answers here, this is just my opinion. If you feel like I missed out on any groups or soloists, let me know down in the comments, as I might make another video like this in the near future. But we'll see. That being said, let's jump right in. Okay, so coming in at 40th place we have Bad Villain. Now this is a rookie group that's more on the underground side of the 5th generation, and ever since their debut I kind of had high hopes for them, as they're very rap heavy and hip hop focused and kind of remind me of XG, but obviously the quality of music is much different between the two. That being said, they only have a few songs available, with Hurricane being one of my favorite rap songs of 2024, but besides that I wasn't really too impressed with the rest of the songs. And I know since then they've had a comeback, but honestly I was a little bit disappointed, and that's why I have them at the bottom of my ranking. Now I gotta say, I still think they do have potential, but hopefully they do show some improvements with their next comeback. Alright, so moving right along, in 39th place, I have chosen Hearts to Hearts. Now this may be a little bit of a shocker, because I would say that The Chase is my favorite debut of 2025, and not only that, but the ballad Butterflies is one of my favorite ballads of all time, and some might even argue that it's a little bit too early to put them on this list, but the only reason why I have them so low is just because they have 2 songs. I still think they have a lot of potential, their quality of music is phenomenal, and I don't doubt that if we were to make this video next year that I would have Hearts to Hearts a lot higher in my ranking, but for now this is where they stand. You know what I really like about Hearts to Hearts is their emotional and elegant style, which is one of my favorite styles in K-pop, and I would even go as far as to say that they do have the potential to become Daesung caliber, but it's too early to tell. But besides that, there isn't really much else for me to say about them, so I'm just gonna move right along. Okay, so now coming in at 38th place, I have chosen Kepler. You know, for the past couple of years, I've been listening to K-pop, and I've been checking out Kepler's music from time to time, and it just never clicked for me. However, if you did see my last video, you would know that their single Yum, I actually really like that song, so I guess there is a chance for me to become a fan sometime in the future. Probably not right now. I still think, at least for me, it would take a little bit more time. I will say, however, they do have a pretty decent sized discography, and they're pretty consistent with their colorful, youthful, high energy style and concepts, but when it comes to their music there isn't really a ton of variety. But I will admit there are quite a few underrated songs, and their music production has improved quite a lot since their debut. So generally I do think there is a lot of room for improvement, and they are heading in the right direction, but for now I'll just keep them here. Alright, so now let's talk about 37th place, where I've chosen VVS. You know, this is like one of the more recent groups that I've discovered. It's probably been only like a month since I've started listening to their music, and I would categorize them more within the underground of the 5th generation. They're very focused on rapping and hip hop, which I feel like we've been seeing quite a lot in the 5th generation, and their target audience is more on the mature side, as their lyrics are pretty explicit compared to most groups out there. Now their discography is pretty small, as they just debuted not too long ago, but I would say for what they have right now, there is a pretty good amount of variety in music styles, and I think that they have a lot of potential. Their music quality is actually kind of impressive. Now I would say that they're pretty far away from a Daesung, but there is a clear path ahead if they take the right steps. And I gotta admit, I'm a pretty big fan right now, and if you haven't listened to their music yet, I would highly recommend giving them a chance. But similar to Hearts to Hearts, it's just too early to tell, so that's why I have them this low in my ranking. So now, coming in at 36th place is IZNA. This is another rookie group within the 5th generation, and they're still in the process of building up their small discography, but I will say that their quality of work is exceptional. They have a very minimalistic blend of R&B and hip-hop, with very catchy songs and a healthy variety of music. Overall, I would say they have a lot of potential to become a standout 5th generation group, but similar to like all the groups before, it's just too early to tell, so that's why I have them this low. Now coming in at number 35, we have Kiki, which is another rookie group within the 5th generation, and obviously they're still building up their discography. However, for what they have right now, I think they're showcasing a perfect blend of hip-hop with a mix of bubblegum pop. So their music sounds pretty unique. So for example, their debut song is like the perfect example of what I'm talking about. Now I would even say that a lot of people like their song I Do Me, which I would also say is one of my favorite debut songs this year. I would have to say that the song BTG made me a fan of the group. And personally, I think that Kiki has a lot of potential to become a leading 5th generation group in the near future. And comparing them to Hearts, personally I would choose Hearts over them in terms of music style and execution, but the reason why I have Kiki ahead is simply because they just have more songs and variety available at the time of making this video. Not to discredit Hearts to Hearts, but like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of hard to make a comparison when they only have 2 songs. But anyway, I think right now Kiki has a pretty good head start in their career. Now coming in at number 34, I've chosen Maiden. This group was recommended to me so many times in my previous videos, so I feel like right now is the perfect time for me to check them out. After going through their discography, I would categorize them more as an underground 5th generation group, and their discography is pretty small, much like most of the groups that we've already covered. But I would say compared to most of them, Maiden's quality of work is phenomenal. They clearly have a focus on the bright and bubbly concept, with some hints of ballads and soft-hearted songs. And like I mentioned before, they are kind of underground, so if they kind of want to become a little bit more mainstream, I do think that they would need their big break, or like a viral song. And I feel like if they do achieve that, they could possibly become a formidable 5th generation group, but we'll just have to see. So now coming in at 33, we have Meow, who I would say is probably one of the more premier rookie groups within the 5th generation. And like the rest of the groups that we continue to talk about, their discography is pretty small. So if you're starting to pick up on a lot of the groups that are on the lower end of my ranking have pretty small discographies, and that's because I don't really feel like it's fair to kind of stack up a small discography to more of the built up discographies like most of the groups already in the 4th generation. That's not to say or to discredit any groups within the 5th generation. I think there's a lot of groups that have already proven to be formidable groups in all of K-pop, but I would say most of the rookie groups still need time to kind of showcase their potential. Now going back to Meow, I would say that their production quality is probably some of the best in the 5th generation. They're very hip-hop focused and they've done it in so many different styles, so there's a lot of variety even with such a small discography. And even though they have only one ballad, I would say Toxic is within one of my favorite ballads of all time. They do have a lot of potential growth as a leading 5th generation group. I think the path is clearly there for them, and I would say that they're pretty close to a Daesung quality, but I would say out of all the rookie groups right now, Meow has a clear head start, as their debut song was a major hit, so hopefully moving forward they can continue with that momentum. Now moving right over to 32, we have Eunice. And here we go again, another 5th generation rookie group that's only been in the game for about a year. However, what really sticks out to me about them is their quality of work. I think it's very exceptional. I do like their style. It's a bit of a hint of a sweet and spicy charisma. They have an overall bright and bubbly kind of concept. If you saw my last video, you would know that I would talk about their most recent release, which is Swish, and it kind of came off as a J-pop kind of style for me. Not really something that I look for when it comes to K-pop. However, they did surprise me, and I actually ended up really liking it after checking it out. And I think that release in particular had a pretty good variety of music styles and kind of made me a fan of the group. Not enough to have a bias just yet. I'm still working on that, but I do think they have a lot of potential, and I would say that they're more within the underrated realm in the 5th generation, and that they do have the foundations to become a leading group in the 5th generation. Now at 31, I have chosen 50/50. You know, to me, this was a very interesting pick simply because, we've experienced 2 different lineups of members for this group. And, the original members debuted towards the end of the 4th generation, whereas the new members are 5th generation. But even still, combining their entire discography, it's still relatively pretty small. However, what I really like about them is their dreamy retro pop, emotional storytelling kind of style. And their quality of work in music has improved a lot since the debut of their new members. So in that sense, I do think their music is a lot better now. However, I would say that a lot of people would consider Cupid as their leading song to this day. But hopefully, with the new lineup, they can push out a new song that surpasses that. Now in 30th place, I've chosen Misamo. And I understand, they're technically J-pop, but if you know me, then you would know that I would always put them in my videos simply because of their relation to Twice. And if any other group had subunits outside of K-pop, I would do the same. However, talking about their discography, I would say it's still pretty small, and that they're pretty heavy on the elegant style, which I think they represent really well, and their quality of music is very high. Not only that, but last year with the release of Hot Couture, they introduced solo songs, which I thought was a pretty good surprise. And I've said it before in my past videos that I fully support subunits for big groups such as Twice, because it is pretty hard for members to stand out in these groups because they don't really have a lot of time in the spotlight. So having subunits like Misamo really allows these idols to have their time to shine and to truly showcase their potential. And personally, I think Twice should have subunits for the rest of the members, kind of similar to what they've done with Formula of Love, because in that album we got 3 songs and each song having 3 members. And I think they did a phenomenal job, with my personal favorite being Hello, which featured Neon, Momo, and Chaeyoung. Now I know it's probably asking too much, but I just think that would be really cool. Now coming in at number 29, I've chosen VVs. Now originally I thought they were a subunit from GFriend, but actually this group was formed right after GFriend's disbandment. I would say that they have a pretty good sized discography, and I would say that they're pretty versatile in styles and concepts. I mean, they range from disco pop to nostalgia to emotional depth. So it really showcases to us that they're not just one-dimensional. I would even say that they're more within the underrated space in their fourth generation, but their quality of work is phenomenal. Now obviously they're really popular for their song Maniac, which I would say really put them on the map, and that their discography is loaded with hidden gems. But personally, I probably wouldn't say I'm a fan of the group just yet. I would need to see a little bit more from them, but they're definitely doing pretty good for themselves. Now in 28th place, I've chosen Racine, which I would say they're one of the rookie groups in the 5th generation that sticks out to me the most. Now even though their discography is pretty small, I would say that their quality of work is really impressive. They have a very nostalgic and dreamy overall kind of concept, and I would even say that so far they don't have a single miss. They have a ton of potential, and they're definitely a group to look out for. And I've only started listening to them a couple weeks ago, and within that short amount of time, they've impressed me quite a lot. So if you haven't heard of them yet, I would highly recommend giving them a chance. Now in 27th place, I've chosen our first soloist within this ranking, and that's for Yena. You know, she has a fairly small discography for someone that debuted towards the end of the 4th generation, and she was a former member of the legendary 4th generation group IZ*ONE. You know, what really stood out to me the most about her is her strong J-pop influence. She has very colorful and high energy songs, and I would argue that she's more within the underrated side of the soloist realm. And towards the end of last year, she did have her moment with her song Nemu Nemu, but the B-side of that single, Sugar, turned me into a huge fan of her. And I do think she does have the potential to reach the level of a Day song, but we would just have to see a little bit more work from her. Now let's talk about number 26, where I've chosen Young Posse. You know, their discography is pretty small, and they're really heavy on the rapping and hip-hop style. Not only that, but I would even say their music production is very Western inspired, and they have a few really amazing ballads. Above that, they're super underrated in the 5th generation. Now, I would say I'm a fan of the group, but probably not to the point where I have a bias. That might take a little bit more time, but so far, I really like their music. So now we've reached the part of the video where we're going to start talking about some of the more heavy hitters within the K-pop world. Now, starting us out at number 25, we've got Everglow. Now, I would say that their discography is pretty small for a 4th generation group. They're pretty heavy on the EDM and electropop kind of style, accompanied by their Girl Crush concept, and I would say that they're pretty consistent across the board with their quality of work, and I would probably even toss them within the underrated side of the 4th generation. Now they do have some pretty good songs here and there, not enough to really attract me to the group. I don't really think they fit my style too much. You know, in some regards they kind of remind me of aespa a little bit, but obviously not on the same caliber. Now coming in at 24th place, we have one of my favorite 5th generation groups, and that's Islet. Look, one thing that I really gotta say is Magnetic is the best 5th generation debut song, and I don't think anything comes close. They have a very dreamy, Y2K, bubbly kind of concept and style, which a lot of people would compare them to New Jeans in some regards, and I personally would give New Jeans the slight edge over Islet when it comes to the Y2K concept, as I think their songs are just far more superior, but that's just my opinion. Now, talking about Islet, they just debuted last year, and their discography is pretty small, but even with that, their quality of work is incredible, and I would even say that they don't have a single miss so far. And above that, I would argue that Pimple is one of the best ballads of all time, and above all else, I would say that they're a Day song caliber group. Now at number 23, let's talk about another one of my favorite 5th generation groups, and that's Baby Monster. Similar to Islet, I think Baemon has a pretty small discography. However, they're more focused within the hip-hop kind of realm, following that YG formula, which you can see across all of their groups. However, Baby Monster performs it more within a youthful atmosphere, which I think makes them unique compared to other YG groups. Not only that, but I would say that the production level for Baby Monster is on an elite level. What I really like about them is that they're very generous in their variety of music, and I would even go as far as saying that they already have a few 5th generation classics. So think Sheesh, Forever, Drip. I mean, they're clearly Day song caliber. I would even say that they're the front runners to win the first Day song within the 5th generation. Now, coming in at number 25, some people might even consider her as one of the greatest idols of all time, we have IU. You know, what really surprised me about her is just the immense size of her discography. I mean, she's been in the game since 2008, and she's had major success since then. Not only that, but what I really admire about her work is that she explores many different genres. So in her early days, she really tapped into R&B. She was very ballad heavy, emotionally rich, and very poetic. Now I gotta say, her quality of work is some of the best that I've ever seen, and she's clearly very talented and can perform pretty much any style you throw at her. Now I do know that I've mentioned many times that I love ballads and even softer toned kind of songs, but for me it just doesn't click with IU. A lot of you guys might put her within your top 5, and that's totally fine. I've been trying to listen to her music since last year, and it doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. Now I'm not saying her music is bad by any means. It just doesn't align with my taste. Now let's talk about another one of my all-time favorite soloists, and that's Taeyeon from Girls' Generation. One thing that I really noticed is that she has a very extensive solo discography, and she's loaded with many different styles and concepts. These concepts revolve around mature, elegant, and emotional storytelling. She has ballads, pop rock, jazz, R&B songs, proving her versatility as an artist. Not only that, but her quality of work is very impressive, accompanied by her beautiful vocals, which I would say is one of the best in the entire industry. So now moving right along to number 20, I have chosen Stacy, who's one of my latest favorite groups. They're really underrated within the 4th generation, and they have a very generous discography size. What I really like about them is their catchy songs and bright pop atmosphere when it comes to their concepts and styles. They have a very good variety of songs, and they're loaded with hidden gems. Not only that, but I would say that they progressed a lot in terms of quality of music, as their recent releases feel a lot more premium. Now, I would say that they're probably still a ways from a day song, but they do have the potential to reach that point. They would just need their viral moment. Now let's talk about number 19, where I've chosen NMIXX. You know, this is another really underrated group within the 4th generation. I feel like their discography is slowly improving with each and every release. And you know, within their early days, they had a very quirky kind of style, which I didn't like at the time, but looking back, I actually really like that music. But even then, I would still say that ever since the beginning of their FE3 or 4 trilogy, they have been improving significantly with their music production. Not only that, but I feel like they're a lot more consistent now with their style of music, as they're leaning more towards a hip-hop kind of vibe these days, which I think suits them really well. However, I will say that every now and then they do sprinkle a little bit of their old style in their new songs, which we did see in a couple songs with their latest release, which is fine, but I would still argue that Stick Out is their masterpiece. And you can say whatever you want, but I think NMIXX is already at a Daesung level when it comes to quality of music. And at this point, I think the only thing that NMIXX is missing is solo work. Coming in 18th place, we have IZ*ONE. You know, this is my very first time checking out this legendary group. You know, what really surprised me the most was the insane lineup that they had. I mean, they had Chaewon, Sakura, Wonyoung, Yoojin, Yena. I mean, they were pretty stacked. However, talking about the discography though, they were very generous considering their short run. I mean, they were only active for 3 years? I would say that they had a lot of releases within that short amount of time, which is pretty impressive within itself. But what I really liked about them is that they had a strong focus on youthful elegance with a bit of a cinematic charm, which you rarely see in K-pop. So I think that's what makes them very unique. Not only that, but they're also loaded with a variety of styles. I will say that their quality of work feels a little bit old school and doesn't really feel as premium as most of the songs out today. But still, I liked it. I'd give them an A+. Alright, so now at number 17, we got NewJeans. Now, their discography is pretty damn small, but even so, I think NewJeans pumped out some of the best music in all of K-pop. I mean, they had a very strong focus on the Y2K concept, which I would say nobody comes close to their caliber in that regard. Now, there isn't really much variety. They are loaded with classics, like I said, and their quality of work is some of the best that I've ever seen in all of K-pop. Now, one thing that I've always wondered about them is what would their solo music look like? And it kind of sucks to see, a group with so much potential such as themselves go through, these issues that they've been battling the past year or so. Honestly, I think NewJeans really had the potential to become probably one of the most legendary K-pop groups of all time. I mean, just look at their early success. They've had so many day songs, and they've led the 4th generation in day songs for the first 2 years. And not only that, but even last year, they were still winning day songs even on a hiatus. So that's pretty impressive if you ask me. And it was just recently that aespa surpassed NewJeans in total Daesung awards. Not to discredit aespa, but it's more so just to highlight how impressive NewJeans were in their prime. Okay, so let's move on to number 16, and let's talk about another one of my favorite 5th generation groups, and arguably within my top 2, and that's Kiss of Life. Now I gotta say, they got a pretty extensive discography for a 5th generation group, which I think is very impressive. Not only that, but I think it was pretty daring for them to debut with solo songs, so I salute them for that. They have a pretty great variety of styles, obviously with a focus on R&B and rapping, and they kind of cater more towards the mature audience, which I think is really good. We don't really see that too much in the world of K-pop, but I do think there are more groups within the 5th generation that are starting to tap into that kind of space. Above that, they do have quite a lot of hidden gems, and I would even argue that they don't have a single miss across their whole discography. Clearly, they're on a Daesung level, and I would even say that they were one of the top groups in 2024. Not only that, but what I find really impressive about Kiss of Life is their fast growth and popularity. I mean, I do think they have the potential to become future legends in the world of K-pop, and I think right now it's safe to say that they're one of the leaders in the 5th generation. And now at number 15, we have IVE. I would say that IVE holds some of the best 4th generation classics, so to me that would have to be 11, Love Dive, Afterlike. I mean, I can go on and on. They made some really good songs early on, and I would even say their earlier work is better than what they put out today. Not that their recent songs are terrible, but I would say last year in particular they really took a step back, as you kind of started to notice that they were focusing a little bit too much on quantity over quality, and I feel like that kind of severely impacted their chances at getting a Daesung, which I think typically you see IVE within the race of getting a Daesung, and I think this year they're back in that conversation, which is cool to see. But if they want to consistently stay within that conversation, I think IVE should really focus more on quality over quantity. Now, as for their discography, I think it's pretty good for the most part. They get a lot of variety. Obviously, they're more focused on the elegant style, which we don't see too much in the 4th generation, as I feel like that was a lot more popular in the previous generations, which I think they represent very well. There's a lot of different styles available, and their quality of work is really strong. And for sure, I would categorize IVE as one of the leading groups within the 4th generation. Alright, so coming in at number 14, I think one of the most impressive discographies within the 5th generation belongs to none other than Triple S. I mean, if you were to just take a quick glance at their discography, you wouldn't think that they're a 5th generation group, just because they're already loaded with so many releases, which can be attributed to not just their group work, but also their subunit work. And Triple S has multiple subunits, which is just mind-boggling, because they have 24 members, which, attracted me to them a lot last year with their album Assemble 24, and recently they came out with Assemble 25, and it just continues to reel me in. Not only that, but I think they have a ton of potential. They're absolutely loaded with hidden gems. They're unfortunately within the underrated side of the 5th generation, which I think really sucks. I think they make some of the best music out there, not just in the 5th generation, but just in K-pop today. They can pretty much perform any style, as if you go through their discography, they have so much variety. And I would even argue that they perform at a Daesung level, but I think they just need one viral hit to put them on the map. Moving right along to number 13, I've chosen G-Friend. I wasn't really recommended this group at all. I more so just stumbled upon their last released Season of Memories, and I checked it out, and I started to dig a little bit deeper into their discography, and I gotta say, their discography is pretty big.
Pause.
They're filled with emotional storytelling concepts. They have a very poetic style of music with hints of orchestral pop, which I think is really unique in the world of K-pop. They're loaded with hidden gems, which I think is pretty nice. And not only that, but I also really like their ballads like Sunshine. Sunshine was a really good ballad. Not only that, but I feel like their newer releases feel a lot more diverse in terms of styles, with rock being something that they're kind of exploring, almost similar to Dreamcatcher in some ways. Overall, though, I wouldn't really say I'm a fan of the group just yet. I probably still need a little bit more time, but so far I like what they got. Now moving right over to number 12, we got the legendary 21, arguably one of the greatest second generation girl groups out there. They got a pretty lengthy discography size, with an emphasis on their girl crush concept. Not only that, but they do perform in a lot of styles, so they got electropop, EDM, hip-hop, a couple hints of R&B here and there, and even reggae, which kind of caught me off guard, but cool nonetheless. I do really love their ballads. I think their ballads are really good. They also have that early 2000s aesthetic and quality of work, which I think makes them really unique in some regards. It's obviously not up to the standard of today's music, but within its own right, I think it sounds really good. Alright, so coming in at number 11, we have Dreamcatcher. This group was highly recommended to me last year, in pretty much every video that I've ever posted, somebody would make a comment about Dreamcatcher. So I think making this video is the perfect opportunity for that. And from what I can say, they're like a really underrated third generation group. However, their discography is huge. And what I really like about them is their heavy influence with rock music, which is something that I think is unheard of in the world of K-pop. I mean, I grew up listening to rock music, and kind of seeing this, I never really expected something like this to ever happen, but it sounds pretty good. I like it for the most part. I like how they have a nice variety of explosive songs, but they also have ballads, which really surprised me. And I would even say that their quality of work is top tier. I would say that this is probably one of my more favorite discographies that I discovered this year, so now obviously it might take me a while to get through all of their work, but I'll get there eventually. Now coming in at number 10, we got aespa. I would argue that right now aespa is on top of the K-pop world. They've been truly dominating since last year, and I don't really see them slowing down anytime soon, as they do have a release scheduled to come out later this month. But anyway, as for this discography, they have a really heavy focus on electropop and hip-hop, and they have a very generous discography with a wide range of styles, staying true to their electropop formula, of course. One of the most unique groups in the industry right now, if you ask me. I don't really see anybody else performing this kind of style, at least not to the level as aespa. Me personally, I really love their earlier work, so think of songs like Illusion, Dreams Come True, and Hold On Tight. For sure one of my all-time favorites from them. I would say those songs in particular made me a fan of the group when I first discovered them. And they have quite a few fourth generation classics, not that many. What I really admire about aespa is that their production level has been slowly improving with every single comeback. I would say in particular with the release of Drama, their music just keeps getting better and better. I mean, look at last year, right? I would say that Supernova is better than Drama. I would say that Armageddon is better than Drama, and probably like their best release so far. Hot Mess was really underrated. Probably not as good as Armageddon, but I could see an argument where Whiplash is better than Armageddon. But what I'm saying is that their releases are just getting really, really good, which is evident because they won so many day songs last year, and now they lead the fourth generation in total wins, which used to be held by New Jeans. Now, I would say that they have a near flawless discography. They do have a couple misses here and there, but besides that, I genuinely like their discography from top to bottom. Now let's talk about BB, who I placed at number 9. I would argue that she's one of the most versatile soloists out there in the whole industry. She can perform any concept you throw at her. Like, if you look at her discography, she pretty much does it all. She's a really talented artist. I mean, her vocals and rapping abilities are top shelf quality. And speaking of quality, I would say her discography is consistently done at a high level. And it's no surprise as to why she's always appearing at award shows. Like, every time I watch like the Mama Awards or Melon Music Awards, I always see BB perform or like win an award over there, so it's just kind of telling of how successful of an artist she truly is. Okay, so now let's talk about number 8, where I've placed ITZY. You know, ITZY has a very extensive amount of songs, and I would say that their earlier work was their prime. And within their earlier work, they have so many K-pop classics. I mean, think of Dalla Dalla, Cheshire, Icy, Wannabe, of course, Not Shy. I mean, I can go on. And a lot of their songs have a very bold, loud, energetic kind of concept, and they started off really strong. But I would say probably after Mafia in the Morning, things started to kind of fall off a little bit. They kind of had a dip in quality since then. And I would say after Ringo, they started to make a slight resurgence, with Born to Be being a phenomenal top to bottom masterpiece in my opinion. For sure like a top 3 ITZY release for me. However, since then I haven't really seen anything that would belong in the day song conversation. Not only that, I'm kind of surprised that ITZY doesn't have any day songs. I mean, even within their prime, like, no day songs for ITZY, that's kind of ridiculous. But again, I think around that time, Twice was in their prime, or like G-Idol was in their prime. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I think ITZY should definitely have some hardware on their shelf. Hopefully we can see them win a day song someday. I'm crossing my fingers for them, but if they want to get within that conversation, I think they really got to step it up. Not only that, but what I really admire about them is that they finally stepped into the soloist space within their Born to Be album. And this year we've seen Yeji come out with her first solo release. Hopefully the rest of the members follow her down the same path. I would love to see Cherry Young in particular come out with a solo release. I mean, among all 5 of the solo songs on Born to Be, I think her song Mine was the best out of the 5, and it wasn't even close. I mean, Crown on My Head was pretty close, but I just think mine was a lot more dominant. It honestly just aligned a lot more with my taste. But yeah, I'd say a lot more of their early work has built their legacy as a legendary fourth generation group. But now I'm just curious as to what they'll do moving forward, as they're starting to get closer towards the end of their contracts. Now at number 7, I've chosen Idol. I would say right off the rip, Idol is one of the best when it comes to concepts. I mean, if you look at their whole discography, they've pretty much done it all. I personally really like it when they do a darker theme. So a pretty good example would be from their song Oh My God, which to me is like one of my all-time favorites from them. Not only that, but they also have so much variety across their entire discography in terms of song styles, not just concepts. And their discography is pretty long, which I would say is quite loaded with fourth generation classics. And above that, they also make some pretty nice ballads. The song I Do personally made me a fan of the group, which was a really nice ballad that came out I think in 2023 or 22, something like that. But yeah, overall, I think they make some of the best music in the fourth generation. Some would even argue that they're the best group within the fourth generation, which I think is fair to say. And 100% they're Daesan caliber. Okay, so moving right over to number 6, we have Girls' Generation. Now, this is arguably one of the greatest girl groups of all time, and right off the bat, they have such a big discography, and they're loaded with all kinds of styles of music. Not only that, but similar to 21, they both similarly share the early 2000s aesthetic for their music, which feels very nostalgic to me. And not only that, but they have a ton of hidden gems, which I think is really nice. And you can kind of see a noticeable evolution in their music. They first started off with a bubblegum pop kind of style, and with their most latest releases, it sounds more mature with a more modern style of production. So you can really get a sense that Girls' Generation has really evolved as a group. Overall, I would say that I am a fan of the group, and obviously Taeyeon is my bias, but not because of Girls' Generation, more so because of her solo work. Alright, so now at number 5, I have chosen LE SSERAFIM. I would say that they probably have one of the most impressive discographies within the fourth generation. They're nearly flawless. I mean, I think they make some of the best ballads across the whole industry, honestly. I'm typically not really a fan of their intro songs. That kind of changed with their latest release, Hot. I think the intro song for that one was actually pretty good. But overall, they do have quite an extensive discography, so there's a lot of variety and different styles across every release. I would always claim as Unforgiven as my favorite LE SSERAFIM release of all time. And I would even say that LE SSERAFIM is loaded with fourth generation classics. Not only that, but I think LE SSERAFIM has been performing at a Daesung level ever since their debut. And it kind of sucks that they only have one Daesung, but that's more so for a performance rather than their actual music. But hopefully they can add some hardware to their shelf by the end of the year. I would even say the only thing that LE SSERAFIM is missing at this point is solo music. Now I know Yoonjin already has her own catalog of solo songs, which is great for her, but I would also love to see the rest of the members kind of follow in her footsteps, as I think that not only would it benefit the group as a whole, but it would also attract a lot more fans. Besides that, I think LE SSERAFIM is doing a perfect job with their music. Alright, so now at number 4, I have chosen Mamamoo. It's probably only been a week since I started listening to their music, and I gotta say, this is probably like the biggest discography that I've ever seen across all of these other groups and soloists. But what I really like about Mamamoo is that they align more with my kind of taste in music. I mean, they got R&B, jazz pop, hip hop. They kind of have more of a retro with a more modern aesthetic to their concepts, which I think is very unique. They're very vocally driven, great quality of work. I mean, their ballads are amazing, loaded with hidden gems. And honestly, I'm just having a blast going through their entire discography. And you know what? Out of all the new groups that I've just talked about, I think Mamamoo has impressed me the most. And I would even go as far as to say that I'm a huge fan of the group. Alright, so now let's talk about number 3, where I've chosen none other than Blackpink. Arguably one of the greatest groups of all time, and one of the very first groups that I've ever listened to. However, not really the group that got me into K-pop. Matter of fact, that was actually New Jeans. But anyway, talking about their discography, Blackpink has a really small discography for a third-gen group, especially for their magnitude of popularity. They are clearly one of the leading groups to perform the girl crush concept with a strong hip-hop inspired kind of style. Their ballads are some of the best in the third generation, in my opinion. Not a ton of variety in terms of styles and concepts, but I would say their whole discography is practically flawless, if I'm being quite honest. They're loaded with classics, and the production quality of their songs are some of the best out there. Not only that, I'm kind of surprised that Blackpink has little to no day songs. I mean, you would think a group of this size would have a shelf just absolutely full of hardware, but that's just not the case. I mean, maybe with their next release, they might be in the running for one, but I don't want to speak too soon. That's definitely a topic for a different video for another day. But anyway, I do love their discography very much. I just wish they had a little bit more to provide, and maybe even experiment with different kind of styles of music and maybe even genres. That'd be great. But either way, I'm pretty satisfied with what they have so far. Alright, so now we're at number 2. At this point, you can probably guess who's number 1. But as for number 2, I have chosen Red Velvet. I would say that Red Velvet is arguably one of the most underrated groups of all time. Their discography is very large, and I would even say that they're one of the best when it comes to a variety in styles and concepts. I mean, Red Velvet can pretty much do any concept. They went from bubblegum pop all the way to a dark horror theme. For example, Chill Kill, that was a really, really good album. I would say that Underwater will forever be one of my favorite Red Velvet songs. And what I really admired about them is how they focus on quality over quantity. And even though we don't see a lot of releases come out from Red Velvet every year, every time that they do come out with something, you know it's going to be at a high level. So I appreciate them for that. And I just wish that more of the popular groups out there today would apply that same practice towards their music. And finally, in first place, and to nobody's surprise, Twice. Arguably the greatest girl group of all time. Their discography is insanely extensive, and just the vast amount of concepts and styles really shows you how versatile they are as a group. Most of their early work consists more of a bright and bubbly kind of vibe, whereas today it feels a lot more mature. So it kind of just shows you how much they've grown as a group. But above that, they're totally jam-packed with some of the most recognizable K-pop songs of all time. They have so many classics, so many hidden gems, so many day songs. I don't think any other discography within this entire list can really come close to what Twice has done across their entire career. So really, I would say that Twice is in a league of their own. However, I will say that their discography is nowhere near flawless, as I would make the argument that sometimes they do focus more on quantity over quality. I mean, a good example was one of their releases last year, Dive. I think the title track Dive was a masterpiece, but everything else beneath that was subpar in my opinion. Now, that's just an example. There are quite a few releases that are just like that, which is to be expected since they have one of the biggest discographies out there, but I think that their classics really make up for it. And to this day, I would still say that What Is Love is my favorite K-pop song of all time. And there you guys have it, my discography ranking of female K-pop groups and soloists. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, as that helps out the channel a ton. And if you're into these kind of videos, then consider subscribing. Also, let me know what you guys think of my ranking, and what would your ranking look like. And if I missed any groups or soloists, let me know down in the comments for a future potential remake of this video. And with that being said, thanks for watching. See you next time.